Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacey and Phil Thompson.
Greetings and salutations. This is the Church Solutions Podcast.
Hi, my name is Steve Lacey.
And I'm Phil Thompson. We are with JSL Solutions, and we are the home of streamingchurch.tv, myflock.com, and
churchapplive.com.
churchapplive.com. Right. Okay. And so mobile apps, streaming video, church management tools, websites, and all that stuff. How you doing, Steve?
Doing okay. Just getting back in the swing of things. Been out of town for the weekend, and now back in. So we missed last week, right?
We did. I wasn't feeling well last week, and now consequently my son's not feeling well today. So I've been running around here doing stuff, and then of course we've had the holidays with the Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so although I think you worked, I didn't, but. Anyhow, it's good to be back. Good to get back. So we do this podcast just for quick review for anybody, for anyone involved, mostly for church-related stuff. And we cover a lot of tech things. We cover volunteer stuff. We cover working with church staff, church leadership.
Mm-hmm. And we do some tech things, right? We talk about,
as I said, And the reason we cover a lot of that gamut is because we are very much involved in our churches over the years for many, many decades. And we have a lot of experience in leadership as well as tech stuff. So we just kind of give you something different. So the last time we did our podcast, we talked about how to do a church podcast.
Right.
And so you can catch that on our YouTube channel. You can catch it on newmediaministries.tv. You can always go to streamingchurch.tv and look under resources. You can go to iTunes and search for Church Solutions Podcast. In fact, give us a review and subscribe to our podcast. And so we talked about podcast, and we hinted that we might do 2 weeks worth, but we're not. We're just, if you missed it, go back and listen to it. If you have questions, send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. I do have some notes and stuff that I can send you, and we could certainly help you put together a podcast for your church. Mm-hmm. I think it's very important to do that.
Yeah, but we covered the basics last time.
We did, absolutely. So today, let's talk a little bit about something that is a subject near and dear to me, and it might be to you folks too, and that would be some traits to finding a good church administrator. Or as I used to call it, church secretary,
yes.
Yeah, and I guess Steve has informed me the word secretary is not a good word to use today.
Well, I don't know. It's just, it is. I think the preferred term these days is administrator.
All right.
So but yes, I grew up with a church secretary.
Well, we're up there in years, and I'm sure there's a lot of churches out there right now that still call their administrators secretaries, just depending on the culture and everything. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you might be a small church and you don't have a church administrator or secretary, but you're probably going to need somebody like that down the road a ways. Or if you're like a lot of churches that are medium-sized churches, you probably need somebody. Or if you have somebody, there's usually kind of a high turnover in some of this, depending on the situation. So these things that we're going to talk about would be very good tips for you if you're a pastor or associate pastor or very much involved in your board, of your church, your leadership team. These things we're going to talk about would be very helpful.
Yeah, so these are good traits to look for in a good church administrator, right?
Exactly. So
you're going to be able to speak from experience of...
I do. I have a lot of experience because not only have I been executive pastor for many years, I was a senior pastor and all that good stuff. And one of my first experiences was probably almost 20 years ago. I was hired by this church to become their executive pastor. They had not really ever had an executive pastor before. And so, I walk in and we had we called her secretary back then, church administrator back then, and a very nice lady. But the first thing I kind of found was that So I'm kind of old school in the sense that I'm thinking, okay, if I'm the executive pastor, I pretty much run the tight ship here. I set things up. But, I found out I didn't really run the ship. She was kind of running the ship. And so she would tell me when she was coming in, and she would tell me when she was leaving. and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'd been in business and actually been involved in management in radio for years. And so I thought, that's not the way I learned how to do that.
The church admin is kind of a key role for the executive pastor, right? Because they're kind of the hands and feet of getting stuff done.
Yeah, the idea, and we'll probably do a podcast one of these days on what's good traits of an executive pastor or executive director, or whatever you want to call it. We can certainly do that in the future, but my role was to, basically manage the church, run the church. Mm-hmm. And so my role was to assist the senior pastor and so he wouldn't have to get his hands dirty. That's probably not a good term, but he wouldn't have to get involved in some of these things. He could focus more on ministry. And that's, if you're listening right now and you're a pastor, you don't have an administrative person or at least an assistant, you might consider trying to get somebody like that, because if you've got your hands in everything, it's going to take away from your messages. It's going to take away from your creativity. So it's important to have somebody like that if you can afford them or have somebody.
Yeah. So before we get into the traits, so one of the things I'd like to point out is you want to hire slow. And
exactly.
This applies to business, but you want to hire slow and fire fast.
Exactly.
And so often a lot of people get that mixed up and bring people in rather quickly, and then that are really slow at removing those that are that don't quite fit well. So you want to take your time and evaluate with these traits in mind.
And a couple of things too I'd like to mention too, and that is whoever you have, if you're going to hire somebody to be your church administrator or your church secretary, again, whatever term you want to use on that, I would strongly consider not hiring somebody's wife or something that's an elder or a deacon or a pastor's wife.
Right.
Unless you're just a really small little church and you're just starting and you need, like, for instance, when I started my church in Kansas years ago, my wife was involved as a legal assistant and secretary for many years, so it was a good fit for her to kind of be my secretary. Plus, I could get up in front of people and say, by the way, I'm sleeping with the church secretary. She was my wife. But, but actually, as time went on, I kind of, I don't want to say push my wife out of that role, but my wife kind of went on to a different role, and we had somebody else.
It might have been okay with you in that position, but if you had other people on staff, it might be uncomfortable having the secretary married to the pastor.
Yeah, you could get into what is it, nepotism? I don't know. What's the term you get into? I mean, again, this is I'm probably offending some people right now because I know there's some people listening that's pastor. Well, my wife is well, okay, good. If it works for you, good. If it works, okay, fine. But for instance, the situation I'm just telling you right now, earlier when we opened up was, basically this gal, she actually quit on me. And she was I think an elder's wife, and so that created tension.
Right,
there's somebody that's on our leadership team, and his wife quits, and then actually she tried to get hired back, and I wouldn't hire her back, and that created tension. And even though the elder tried to be as unbiased as he could, it was still his wife.
Right,
you see what I'm saying? And so just look out for that stuff. I'm giving you a heads up. If it's working, okay, but you might consider not going down that road and hiring somebody that maybe isn't related to the leadership.
Right.
So, again, I probably got some people upset with me, but I'm just telling you there are things to consider. All right. So, anyhow, without getting into a lot of details about that deal, like you said, it took me a long time to hire one. I hired a secretary after she left. And actually, the senior pastor got on my case about it. Well, we need to have somebody. I'm like, I don't want to hire the wrong person.
Right.
And a lot of people I had come in that were like interviewing didn't have a lot of these traits we're going to talk about. They were weak in certain areas. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to hire somebody and then have to, create a problem.
Right, exactly.
Right. So what's the first trait we should
So the first trait, confidentiality.
Confidentiality. Okay, so every administrative secretary or whatever we're calling a person here, they've got to have an understanding that it's got to be really strictly confidential, because somebody calls to speak with the senior pastor or one of the pastors on staff. It could be a sensitive subject that they have to talk about. Could be family related. Could be, who knows what it could be. So she or he, whoever that person is that's handling this stuff, has got to be, accountable. Has got to be, very careful with what's going on.
And they need to, I guess, have good judgment too. On they may think it's no big deal, but they need to kind of put their professional hat on and not disclose any private matters that go on with anyone that's outside of the affected parties.
Yeah. And so again, this falls into prayer requests too, which is kind of, the next point I had here. And, again, if you're not careful, if that person is not good with confidentiality, has an issue with gossip, prayer requests can turn into huge things of gossip, and it can be very, very destructive to your church. And so, please, really kind of, check your resources out when you're hiring somebody, and make sure that this person understands. And then really, keep an eye on it, so to speak.
And that may be a trait that kind of maybe tough to pull out of somebody as you're interviewing them.
I know it is. I don't have an answer on how to do that, except to explain to them how important it is.
Yeah, or maybe,
we won't tolerate gossip. We won't tolerate, everything has to be strictly confidential. So it's. I mean, I would check references. I would get references.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to
those kind of things. I mean, so often, even in small churches, we just hire somebody needs a job, we hire them.
Right.
Somebody's wife needs a job, or whatever.
And a large percentage of the things that go on at the church are going to go through your administrator, so they're going to be very much in the know.
Exactly.
On what's going on. So. Yeah, it's
they've got
important
to be
that they got to be able to treat things in confidentiality.
Yeah, so important for the church administrator, he or she, whoever that person is. And the other thing, again, confidentiality, careful with gossip, and the prayer requests. And then the second point would be that person's got to have the gift of organization.
Yes, yes. Typically, they need to be overflowing in the gift of organization, because there's going to be people around them that won't have that gift that they're going to need to potentially compensate for as well.
Yeah, ministry can be, anybody that's listening to this podcast that's involved in some type of leadership in your church. Churches can be a ball of confusion, because you got a lot of people running around, and they all have good intentions. But there can be, it can be confusion. And so, there's a scripture that talks about the gift of administration. And I think that's true. This person's got to have the gift of administration, because if they don't, things can get out of hand in a hurry, especially as you grow as a church. And then, and the other thing to think about too is if that person leaves that position, or if that person goes on vacation.
Right. If they don't have an organized system in place, people are like,
everything's on hold, till that person gets back.
Right.
And it's almost a control issue. And so, and then again, if somebody leaves, and again, there's this position can be kind of a high turnover depending on, where you're at and all that kind of stuff. So, you have somebody who maybe works for a year or two, and then they move on, they get a different job somewhere, they move away or something. The person that comes in, I've kind of had this experience as helping out this church as an executive pastor now, part-time. I had to come over and take over somebody's position. It was a mess. Mm-hmm. The guy I've replaced is an awesome guy. He's a great guy, but it's the ball of confusion. Oh, yeah. I'm still picking things up, and it's just, so it really, organization is so important. It's a trait that is so important.
Yeah. And I guess, being organized kind of ties into having a system in place that you're exercising and that other people know and are aware of. So
right, yeah, and that's a good point, Steve. Is if you don't have a system to help people now, or help your administrator now, help he or she find a system and get them implemented in it, and then some, make sure some other people have some access to that system,
right?
And because if something happens, somebody can at least keep the ball rolling until you find a different position. All right.
So number 3 on our list. Are we moving on?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm fine with it if you are.
First impressions.
First impressions.
Yes.
Important. Why is that important? Well, it's like anything in life, and especially if you've done some business stuff in the past. You know, the old saying is true: you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So when you have and I, you know, working with JSL Solutions and stuff, I do a lot of customer support with people, and I have to call churches back sometimes, you know, and
one of your favorite parts, huh? Because
well,
you always get right to where you need to get, right to the person you need, right?
Well, some of the issues I have is some churches have some voicemail systems, and they are
phone systems, yeah.
Phone systems in their voicemail are just, it's just, you know, I mean, how, you know, I guess some of the people have direct lines to the right people, but, you know, I mean, I'm a lot of times I'm asked to call the church, you know, hey, I need some help here, call me. And then I get into the voicemail system and it's like, I'm lost, you know, but I've also had some issues where, you know, the gal that's answering the phone or the guy is just, doesn't make a good impression on me. I'm just trying to help. I'm not trying to sell you anything. You've probably already bought something from us. I'm just trying to help you get it going, you know, and I can just imagine that sometimes when these people answer the phone and they don't have very good phone etiquette. They don't have very good manners. And that's just the phone.
Yeah. And it's probably a tough job because I bet a large percentage of the calls that are coming in are not completely legitimate, right?
A lot of solicitation.
A lot of people looking for handouts or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, creating a good first impression. Now we talk a lot about often that first impression is extended out on the webs so that you know a lot of people's first impression is going to be your church website.
Right.
So they may get through the website and pull up a phone number and then give you a call, and then the wheels fall off if you don't have a good second impression for some and first impression for others, as well as those that are, you know, coming through the doors of the church during the week or to, you know, learn about this or that. Typically, the church admin is the first person they're going to run into.
Yep. Which brings to another point as far as first impressions, and that is, you know, the appearance. And when I talk about appearance, I'm talking about really you know me, Steve. I'm not real big on appearances. I mean, look at me right now. You know, I need a haircut. I'm wearing a flannel shirt, and I've got shorts. I don't have shoes on, but I do when I'm going to see some of our clients. I generally clean my act up a little bit. Professional appearance does say something.
Yes, and
so you know that person needs to look somewhat professional, even if we're out here in the desert Southwest.
Yeah, so and everyone's kind of gone casual, right? But there's still a professional casual look.
Yeah, there is. So, and again, we're out here out west in Arizona, but you know, we're talking to some people right now listening to this podcast that are, you know, New York or you know, different parts of the East.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was in the aerospace business, the company was owned on the East Coast, and the company that bought our company was on the East Coast, and we were from West Coast in California. And it was interesting how the attire is much more formal on the East Coast than it is out west.
Yeah, it really is.
So what the minimum standard on, you know, the East Coast is very different than the West Coast minimum standards for professional attire.
Yeah. And as we've always said when we do this Church Solutions podcast, we know that there's different cultures, different church cultures. And so a lot of times we'll talk about something and that may not be the culture in your church. But I have a feeling, you know, for a lot of the churches that, you know, you've got to make sure that the appearance is, you know, somewhat professional and you know, even things like smiling, you know, when people walk in the door. And I was in broadcasting for years, and I used to teach a broadcasting school. And one of the things I always told my announcers was smile when you're talking on the air. Well, we're not doing video, we're doing audio. Yes, but people can hear your smile. And it's true. There's something about smiling when you're talking that there's something you can hear in that. Well, obviously in this situation, somebody's walking in the door. You know, you want to have somebody that's going to give them a little bit of attention, maybe the wheels are coming off. Maybe it's just the computer program's crashing. You're having a bad day as this church administrator. You got to put that down for a moment and be nice and friendly, smile. And yes, it takes a lot of patience.
Right. Create a welcoming experience.
Yeah. I mean, but we do that on the phones. If somebody calls us on the phone, I mean, you can be having a bad day coding, and I have something, Google's not working for me or something, and I have to all of a sudden make sure that I'm in a good mood right away when I'm talking to somebody. So anyhow, yeah. So all that kind of thing is very important when we're talking about traits of a good church administrative assistant.
Right.
Is what some people call it.
So number 5 on our list?
I've lost track. Yeah,
I think number 5 on our list is responsible.
Responsibility is so important. I run into a lot of people that believe, well, it's church. It's just church. Well, church, I understand church is not a business, but in some ways it is. And because you really want to run your church in a responsible way, obviously with the money, but also in other areas. Mm-hmm. And so somebody that's an administrative assistant, that's kind of what I've now.
Typically they would take care of some of these, or they're going to have some tasks that are going to be their responsibility.
Business related things.
Yeah. So like paying bills and making sure permits are in place and that sort of thing.
I've just recently had to deal with some of this stuff. I'm helping this church out part-time on the weekends, and I've recently had to deal with things that weren't done right, and so I'm getting shut-off notices and all these things like, wait a minute, what's going on here, And it's not like we didn't have the money to pay the bills. It just didn't get paid, for whatever reason. So there's got to be responsible. That person, the trait of that administrative assistant, whatever you want to call him or her, they have to have they've got to be responsible with their job. They've got to make sure that things are paid, that, you have different programs happening in your church. A lot of times Vacation Bible School might be anything.
All right.
They've got to be able to, if that's their job, they've got to be able to handle that with some responsibility. Your next one, the next one on our little list here, Steve, is something that's probably right up your alley.
I guess so, yeah. So that's computer savvy.
Computer savvy.
Or tech savvy.
Mm-hmm.
So, the management of churches, businesses, just about everything under the sun has migrated to the computer.
Yeah.
And so you're going to need somebody that's computer savvy. I was just telling you before we went on that I was talking with a church that was looking for somebody that was computer savvy just to be able to talk with us.
Right.
So I was trying to explain that it's really easy. You just need to download this app and launch it. And that was somewhat of a foreign language to this group I was talking to. And so they were saying, well, we need to wait until we can get one of our younger, more computer savvy people that can understand what download application and install it on the computer means. So you definitely are going to need somebody, and typically the management of the church is using some management system, either online management system, maybe ours, maybe somebody else's. So they're going to need to know their way around the computer.
I just recently, we use the church I work with part-time uses a program called Worship Planner. I think it's Worship Planner, I think is what it's called. Worship Planning. I get mixed up, but because I know your church uses it.
Yeah.
Right? And is it Worship Planning? I forget.
Yes, Worship Planning, I believe.
WorshipPlanning.com. Yeah, I like it. It's good. I don't use it that much, but my volunteer coordinator, who happens to be just a volunteer, and I say just, I don't mean that's very important, but they do it part-time. That person's kind of transitioning, starting their own business, and so we're looking for somebody that would part-time, and again, it's not paid, it's a volunteer to help coordinate our volunteers, to help coordinate the people that we have doing things, ushers, greeters, all that stuff. So we got a gal that says, I want to do that, I could really do that. She's not computer savvy.
Yeah, and that would be
it scares her,
disastrous,
and it was already, and so it scares her, and I understand, if you've not really done a lot of this, it can be intimidating, it can be challenging, and I guess somebody actually tried to help her and didn't get too far. So, if your administrative assistant isn't computer literate,
you're going to have some challenges.
You're going to have, because as you said at the very beginning of this little topic here, almost everything now is computer related. I mean, I can't think of anything that's not.
Right.
Business as well as church.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've got my mother-in-law who's just turned 90, and she has a computer, but she hasn't turned it on in years now. And so she's just amazed with the amount of things that you can do on the computer. Yeah. But it's completely foreign to her. Yeah. So she would not make a good church administrator.
Yeah, my brother, who's in his mid-60s, would probably be a good administrator, but he doesn't have a computer, and he comes back and visits, and I'll boot up something on the computer and show him all. He's a huge model airplane buff, not model, but just history and models and planes and all that. And I'm pulling up all these things about World War II aircraft, and he's just amazed. I said, Tom, it's like having all the magazines in the world at your fingertips online. You want to look up something, you can look it up. You don't have to go down to the store and get a magazine, or a newspaper, and one of these days he'll probably get one.
Yeah,
but he's
so
just
some people just kind of live in just a different world. It's interesting talking to the mother-in-law about how they would do things when she was an administrator is very, very different than the way things occur today.
Yeah, it really has changed. It's 2015. So that's a trait that is really important, and if that person struggles with that means you're going to struggle. If you're overseeing that person, because now you've got to help them to do something. So hopefully that'll help a little bit. So there's lots of traits that you can talk about, but these I think are one of the most important things.
Right.
And I would strongly consider, as you said at the very beginning, Steve, take your time.
Yeah. Hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah. And you might say, well, our secretary just quit. We got to find somebody right away. Well, I wouldn't rush. Take your time, interview lots of people. Mm-hmm. As we said at the very beginning of this podcast, really be careful who you decide you're going to use. And, you probably need to figure out right up front, okay, if they're related to somebody here that's in leadership, is that an okay thing?
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's not such a good thing. So things to think about. Okay. So if you need any help with this stuff, we can give you notes or whatever. Just send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. You can find us on iTunes. Look for Church Solutions Podcast. You can go to our YouTube channel that has videos as well as the audio of what we've been doing recently on these podcasts. The YouTube channel, I think you just do a search for Phil Thompson Live. And that's the channel that we put all these on. And you can listen to those and look at some of the older videos that you and I have done over the past couple of years on different things. So, all right, good. All right, Steve. So it's good to see you. Good to have you back here in Tucson.
It's going to be a great year.
It'll be a good year. I really do. We got some great things planned for streamingchurch.tv as well as myflock.com. Mm-hmm. Some things coming up.
Some big changes and updates. And
Church App Live as well. Always doing some stuff there. So if you're not on our mailing list, get on it, folks. Support@streamingchurch.tv. That will wrap things up. Have yourself a great day. We will catch you next time for another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. Take care.